Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome colleagues to our Safeguarding webinar, 6-part strategy to teach sensitive issues. My name is Costa Constantinou and I am the Director of Educational Services at Veema Education. Taking part in this webinar are teachers not only from England, but from Nepal, Kuwait, Kenya, Emirates, Cyprus and Madrid. So a warm welcome once again from all of us at Veema Education. It's a great pleasure to be hosting this webinar with my colleague Karen Bell, our accredited safeguarding and leadership consultant at Veema Education. Karen has 20 years experience in education, working initially as a teacher of maths before progressing to senior leadership roles. Karen has worked in the UK and abroad on developmental projects where inclusion and assessment were key. The possesses a deep personal knowledge and expertise in both areas. She has led on inclusion on senior leadership levels in 2 schools, achieving SLE status at her specialism. Having helped take schools out of special measures and being a key leader in another rated outstanding school, all areas. She has confidently prepared any school for a successful inspection. The learning intention for today's session with Karen is to support you to establish a framework that enables you to tackle sensitive topics within your classroom and schools. It is important to remember that this is an introductory session and one that is covered in greater detail on one of our safeguarding programs. There will be time for questions at the end, so please do send them through to me and we will look at them in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Any questions we do not have time to answer, please send them across by email and we will get back to you by the next week. Finally, if you missed the webinar, we do record it. It will feature on our website for you to listen to again and share with colleagues in your school or schools. Now it's time for me to stop talking and pass you over to Karen.
Thank you, Costa, for that lovely introduction. And it is my great pleasure to welcome colleagues from around the world to our strategy that we use to teach sensitive issues. So I'm going to start off with our agenda for this 50-minute webinar. And our agenda starts with us being able to understand what we actually mean by sensitive topics. Then know why we teach sensitive topics. And then help you build a framework that's our 6-step framework around approaching teaching sensitive topics. The purpose of this is to enable you as teachers, whatever subject you teach, to feel confident in tackling the increasingly diverse range of topics that we feel are raised in the classroom today. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at what is a sensitive topic. So I'd like you to take 30 seconds to think about what sensitive topics are, what sensitive issues are for you in your school. I've put a list of possible issues you might come across on the screen in front of you. So I just want you to take 30 seconds to absorb those and think about the ones that might be relative to your situation. The very nature of these topics can evoke thoughts and feelings at a very personal level, which can result in the expression of strong and sometimes extreme opinions, which other members of a group may agree with or indeed find abhorrent. Equally, other students may feel so uncomfortable about opinions expressed and the manner that they are expressed that they feel unable to participate. Crucially, some of your students may have personal experience of the issue under discussion. For example, if you were talking about abuse, in the UK, the NSPCC research shows that 1/4 of 13 to 17-year-olds have experienced some sort of violence within a relationship. 2 women a week are killed by their partners in an abusive relationship. So it is possible that while discussing a topic like abuse, that you will have students that have got personal experience of this. So in terms of why we teach sensitive topics, it doesn't matter what subject you teach, it's likely that you will at some point have to think about including sensitive topics. You can't teach To Kill a Mockingbird without looking at the issue of rape. Much of history is unpleasant and controversial. For example, you can't teach American history without teaching slavery and segregation. The key to developing critical thinking skills is that young people are able to think and analyse their own thoughts. Developing young people as members of society so that they can respect others' views and that they're tolerant of other people's opinions. So I'm going to start and introduce our 6-part strategy. We use an acronym, So Safe, and we're going to explore throughout this each element of our 6-part strategy. This should give you a framework that you can use in introducing any topic within a classroom. So if we start off with S, S stands for Safe Classroom. So we're going to look at what we mean by a safe classroom. In a safe classroom, we would make sure that students listened respectfully without interrupting, that they respected one another's views. In order for students to express their opinions and participate in classroom discussions, they need to feel safe and they need to not be in fear of retaliation for comments they make during discussion. It's best to establish a supportive classroom atmosphere with ground rules for a discussion, and this is a commonly used framework. Before facilitating discussion about possible sensitive topics, it's important that you consider your own bias or your own confusion around a particular issue. How have you come to know what you know, or how have you come to think what you think? Why have you valued some information or sources over others? We need to make sure that we avoid using inflammatory language, that we encourage young people and set boundaries around the safe classroom. So just like we would as adults, if we were partaking in some safeguarding training, set up and establish at the start of that a safe environment, we do exactly the same with young people. So S in our So Safe is a safe classroom. We're now going to go on to O. O stands for open questions. When we're looking at open questions, an open question implies that the matter has not yet been decided. It therefore becomes relevant to establish a debate about the topic. So let us look at how we might create an open question at the start of our teaching. When we try and help students understand sensitive topics, it's important that we make sure we introduce terms like empathy and perspective. So what we've got on the screen at the moment are a set of statements, and I would like you to consider these statements and think how you might change them into an unbiased open question. So I would like you to pick 2 statements from the screen and turn them into an unbiased open question. I'm going to give you 1 minute to do that, and then we're going to look at a few that I've done. Okay, so you've all had an opportunity to think about the statements that we've got. So some of the sensitive topics that we've got in front of you, and think about how you might change them into an open question for a discussion in your classroom. So, would the death penalty ever be acceptable? Are we becoming too dependent on computers? Should smoking have a worldwide ban? Do single-sex schools provide a better education? They're all possible openers for discussing sensitive issues in your classroom. It's important to remember that each of the students in your classroom come from unique backgrounds and therefore have very different experiences. This diversity is a clear asset, and we need to give students the opportunity to express their views and make it their goal to understand, value and respect those from other people. So we would start off with an open question. So our S from our So Safe acronym stands for sources. So we're going to think about sources. These are vital in supporting students to develop and challenge their own points of view. So we would ask students to identify key points from information, stating their sources. You could ask students to do this individually and then pool the information, or you can simply elicit information from the class as a whole and make a list for referring back to. Use this as an opportunity to identify statements of personal opinion or experience. Acknowledge how difficult it might be. So the type of sources, and it's important that you use a range of sources. So if we were teaching, for example, female genital mutilation, it's important that we don't just use one case study. It's important that we use clips with different perspectives. If we're teaching about suicide, it's important that we create different scenarios. Wherever our young people have got the opportunity to read and view material like 13 Reasons, which has been very high profile with young people, that they do get the opportunity to think about suicide as a topic. So sources can come from a range of literature, photographs, drama, a whole wide range of sources should be used. And although you must certainly will agree with one side of a controversial issue, you need to be the moderator so that you can present both sides by giving students separate selections and supporting opposite opinions by presenting materials that cover a variety of points of view in one piece. It's your role to make sure that your students understand the issue, the problems connected with it, and any unfamiliar vocabulary they may encounter. Vocabulary is a key part of introducing sources. You will need to think about the way this is introduced to your session. We're now going to go on to the A from our So Safe acronym. A stands for absorb. Absorb is a really key part of setting up this classroom. Giving young people a set of sources and allowing them the time to process what you've given them. So giving them the opportunity to review what's in front of them, take it in and create their own opinion, giving them personal reflection time. What we're aiming to achieve is avoiding a reaction. A big part of setting up some quiet time, and that may be 5 minutes as part of a session to absorb some sources, is helping and supporting young people in managing their own reactions. In ensuring that we use this as an opportunity to develop children's resilience, their mental health, and their self-managing strategies, we need to think about their reactions to materials and sources that we're providing. We need to think about the issues we are raising and why we are raising them and the material we're using. So allowing this quiet time to internalise the material is about children, young people, managing their own reactions. We're now going to go on to our F part of our So Safe acronym. So we've got a safe classroom, one that's set up where children feel able to confidently contribute to a sensitive topic. One that is set up with an open question, without bias. One where the teacher has allocated a significant number of resources to providing a rounded point of view. One where children have been encouraged to review everything they're presented with and not react to what will be possibly an emotive situation. And now we're going to get on to our facilitate part. So being a facilitator is slightly different to being a teacher. So what you're doing as a facilitator is proactively encouraging debate. You're going to use questions throughout this. The sort of questions that you're going to be using are, can you give me an example of? How do you know that this is an issue? What are your reasons? Questions that probe and questions that particularly ask for evidence. You're potentially going to be inviting disagreement. You're going to be encouraging students to speak up with different opinions while still maintaining decorum. It's up to you to foster and maintain civility in your classroom and to help students understand the guidelines for discussing difficult ideas. Enabling and facilitating discussion of ideas, not people. You must support the students to enhance their opportunities to grow in this discussion. You've provided the guidelines for this safe environment and respectful discussion. It's now up to you as a facilitator to implement those. Helping students make connections and clarify contributions to the conversation. Taking this role seriously can be the difference between a successful or an unsuccessful debate. You must never allow your personal bias to influence the facts. That would get in the way of the opportunity for students to examine different perspectives. So you must be aware of your own bias, be aware of your own opinions. You need to have some pre-prepared questions to use so that you can intervene if necessary. You need to proactively monitor any breakout discussions to ensure that there is constructive examination of an issue. Avoid singling out individual students for their views. Make sure that the ground rules are revisited if necessary. Consider calling a timeout. So we're going to go back to the topics that you looked at to start off with. So when we came up with our sensitive topic list, I asked you to think about ones that were relevant to your situation. So you have now identified at least 2 topics that are relevant to your situation, that's unique to your school. And I'd like you to think about an open question relating to those topics. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to come up with open questions that relate to the topics that you've identified. So for example, if one of the issues you're needing to raise is around suicide, an open question might be, would suicide ever be legal? In what circumstances should suicide be legal? Those are the questions that would set up a discussion for your classroom. You might then think about different sources that look at suicide and euthanasia. You would then allow the children to absorb those sources and then think about facilitating your classroom. And it may be that the facilitation is in groups. So it may be that as a facilitator, you might set up groups with different viewpoints. So I now want you to think about, for your particular topic, what different viewpoints you might have. What different viewpoints might you be setting up as a facilitator? So we're still looking at facilitation. What questions might you give those groups? How might you know that those questions are creating a respectful discussion? What questions, as a facilitator, might you pre-prepare? What I'd like you to do now is think about the whole process, this 6-part process. A safe classroom, open questions, sources, chance to absorb, facilitation, and think about summarising for yourself how you might include that in your classroom. The last part of our strategy is evaluate. It's important that at the end of any discussion time, that like I've asked you to do now, that we summarise the main points. You can ask students to do this in a written form, which you can take into the next lesson. Allowing students to summarise provides them with the opportunity to recall, review and reflect upon the content of the discussion. The goal in teaching a controversial subject is not always to sway students to one opinion or the other, but hopefully to allow them the opportunity to express themselves more clearly and give support for their beliefs and opinions. So giving them the opportunity to summarise their findings, to recall the key parts, to review their thinking and reflect are important skills for being effective critical thinkers. And if we go back to where we started about why we teach sensitive issues, it's around enabling young people to effectively take part in a diverse curriculum. Literature today covers a vast range of sensitive topics. In the media, our sensitive issues are ever increasing. When we look at the impact of things on YouTube, we can see that we need to ensure that our young people can explore sensitive issues in a safe environment. So our 6-part strategy is create a safe classroom. Think about how you set up a session, a safeguarding session as an adult. Think about the safeguarding sessions you've been part of as an adult. Think about the start to those, where you establish ground rules, what those ground rules are. That we keep ourselves safe, that we keep the discussion in the room, that we don't have repercussions for people's contributions, that what's said in the room stays in the room. All of those ground rules that we would set up when we are taking part in a safeguarding session, we need to make sure we establish in a similar session for young people. That we are aware of our own bias, and that we use that awareness to make sure that we have open questions. That we make sure that our research in terms of our sources offer the opportunity to explore all points of view. And that we try and use current and relevant sources. That we don't just think about written text sources. In our media-heavy world, we think about sources from other mediums. that we encourage young people to manage their own reactions, that we encourage young people to think about the material they're presented with, absorb it, and internalise and think about their own opinion based on the material they've got. That we practice effective facilitation skills. We don't see ourselves as the teacher, that we see ourselves as the facilitator in this situation. We see ourselves as providing a safe, productive and respectful classroom where discussions take place, and that we use this as an opportunity to make curricular connections. And that we ensure that every sensitive issue is evaluated, so we don't allow young people to leave our classrooms without securely knowing the main points of the issue that you've been reviewing. That we encourage reflective young people. That we encourage them to express their opinions clearly, but with supporting materials and supporting sources for their beliefs and opinions. So that's a 6-part strategy. That's the reason why we might teach it, and the issues that we might come across in today's society. So I would like to thank Veema for giving me the opportunity to present this webinar. We've got numerous other webinars that are free. They're a maximum of 50 minutes and they're delivered by subject experts. So the first one is Voice Matters, building awareness of how voice can impact on your teaching, and that's on the 23rd of November. The second one is Access All Areas, Making Every Child Matter, on the 6th of December. And the third one is Nurturing EAL Towards Bilingual Learners, delivered in January, the 18th of January. Please make a note of those really important dates, and those are all going to be delivered at 1:30 p.m. GMT. Our research corner at Veema can be found on our website. It's a library of research. It can be found in the top right-hand corner of the web page, and it's populated with a vast array of current and up-to-date research articles. And I certainly would encourage you to go and have a look at that and think about the research that's on there. Research-led teaching is a really important part of what we do at Veema. So basing your teaching on research is an important part of how we operate as a company. And lastly, I'd like to, on behalf of Veema, offer you a 10% discount on all safeguarding courses. We offer a variety of safeguarding CPD courses around whole school child protection, safe recruitment, leading safely. And if you contact Veema and quote safer webinar, you'll be entitled to a 10% discount. We also offer the opportunity to tailor CPD to your individual needs, so it doesn't have to be a specific package. It can be an individually tailored programme to your needs. We're now going to think about some questions that you might have had throughout this session and give you the opportunity to ask those questions. Costa.
Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part in today's webinar, and thank you, Karen. Such valuable information for all of us to hear and put into practice in our schools. Remember, we have lots of articles and useful reads on the website www.veema.co.uk, as well as information about our CPD packages and promotional offers. Now's the opportunity where questions will come in. That we do have a question around just the sensitive issues slides that we showed at the beginning. Karen, can you just briefly just talk about, recap on some of those sensitive issues and why it's important to address those issues in the classroom?
Yeah, sure. Just let me get those in front of me. So the sensitive issues I talked about. So I listed 21 sensitive issues that had come up when we'd done an activity, a CPD activity around this in one of the schools I support, and these were the ones that were repeatedly identified as topics that teachers found difficult to deal with. So you know, there's domestic violence there, which as I sort of identified, you know, a number of children witnessed domestic violence, unfortunately. You know, a quarter of young people are identified as having witnessed some sort of domestic violence, either been part of it themselves or have seen it in their family setting. You know, disability is often a topic that if we're to engender tolerance with our young people, tolerance of differences, so whether that be disability or whether that be gender issues or race issues or race differences, then you know, we need to make sure that we are tolerant of each other and tolerant of our differences. So we must make sure that we teach children they're not just automatically going to be tolerant and know and understand. We've got to make sure we give opportunity to discuss these issues. If we don't, they get you know, we look at children where they get their opinions from. They get their opinions from home, which is a really, you know, positive place for them to have an opinion from. But they're likely to be one set of opinions, one point of view. So it's really important that we give around all of these issues the opportunity to have further information, really, to have more than one point of view, to have the opportunity to think about this from not just their family's point of view, the people that they're in regular contact with, but from other points of view as well. We think about mental health, and in some sections of society, mental health is a topic that is not discussed at all. And young people, mental health is a huge issue for some young people. And if it's not discussed within the family, then it becomes very difficult for young people to be able to explore how they can become mentally healthy themselves. So it's about making sure that children have the opportunity to have rounded views from more than one point of view, from more than just their family.
Thank you very much, Karen. I think that answers the details, the question in great detail. And the webinar will be on the website for people to access and listen to and share with colleagues again. We have another point here, a question that's come in saying 6-part strategy really helpful for talking about sensitive issues. How do you think you know, staff should start talking about this tomorrow when they go back into school? What should be the first steps in implementing this?
So I think it depends on what type of subject you teach, but I think one of the easiest ways to do this is to link it into some curriculum opportunity. So to think about you know, if you are a history teacher, what topics in history have got sensitive issues where you could think about that? If you are an English teacher, where are the sensitive issues around that? If you're a PE teacher, you know, there are lots of different ways that you could link sensitive issues into, or discussions into your particular area, your particular curriculum area. So linking it into curriculum is a really good place to set. It's a really good opportunity to set up a debate around a particular. Or if you are a form tutor or a PSE teacher, to think about current things, items that are currently in the news, or things that have been currently explored within the media, always offer a good opportunity to explore these issues in more detail and to set up that type of discussion. Does that answer your question, do you think?
Well, it wasn't a question for me, but it was from one of our teachers, but I'm hoping it has. And if they do need us to go into any more detail, then I'm sure they will email us and we can reply via email. And there's one more question that's come through from Elizabeth Clancy. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it's about discussions in the classroom. Can we guarantee that discussions in the classroom stay in the classroom? And what happens if a child protection issue is raised?
Well, we can't guarantee they stay in the classroom. We're talking about young people, and obviously, you know, often about 30 of them. So, you know, nobody can offer any guarantees. But I think if you establish, it's probably about taking things one step at a time. So establishing that safe classroom and establishing some ground rules and giving some suggestions of why those ground rules exist, so why you want to keep things in the classroom, and talk about, you could give, you could share statistics like I shared with you today. You know, it is likely that, you know, 5 of you in here have got some experience of, so think about providing some statistical background to what you're doing, and that will start encouraging people to think, well, actually this might be real for some people, what we're discussing might be real. So them understanding why it's important it stays in the classroom and isn't shared, you can think about how you're going to create that in your safer classroom part. And if a child protection issue is raised, then obviously you would need to sort of follow your own particular processes within school. You would, so if a child starts to explore something that's personal to them, you would need to think about how you could deal with that very sensitively, and perhaps think about having another adult come and speak to them at that time, because it is likely that some children will have experience or will want to share things. You could also think about the support network in school. So, or if you know that you're going to introduce a particular topic, say around mental health, and you suspect that this might be real for somebody in your classroom, identifying that to people within the pastoral team so that they're aware, or if you feel that there are people that this might be a real issue for, making sure that prior to the lesson you talk to them, and maybe depending on how where they're at with that particular topic, maybe giving the option for them to opt out in the first instance, and you would have to judge that on its individual circumstances, and every class teacher will know their class best. So if you know that you're going to discuss an issue around drugs, and you know that you've got a child in your classroom for whom drug use is an issue within the family, you might want to pre-speak to them about that and give them the option not to take part in that particular discussion. You will have to set that up as best fits you, but it's always important that if a child protection issue is raised, that you follow your school systems and processes, that you do that on the day, and that you make sure that your safeguarding is aware of that on the day. So I hope, Elizabeth, that answers your question.
Thank you, Karen. I think that's really valuable and important information for people to remember to follow the school system and the procedures, as well as make sure that it's recorded on the day. We have one more question. We're just about time for one more question from Geraldine Pasquale. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She's asking for a few more examples regarding...
Sorry, I've lost you there. She's asking for a few more examples regarding... Hello? 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 Hello?
in school.
Sorry, can you say that again, Costa, because I lost you there.
I'm afraid my internet dropped. I apologise for that.
No, that's fine.
Geraldine Pasquale is asking, I hope I get this correctly, is asking for some examples of mental health.
Okay. So in terms of mental health, you might talk about, so obviously depression is the first one that comes to mind, anxiety. So if you're coming up to an exam season, or an assessment season, sometimes children display a lot of anxiety, and that is an early sign of a mental health. Anxiety is an issue for many young people, and that is, as I've said, one of the early signs around mental health. Depression, that would be an example of mental health, which can lead, all of the things can lead into issues like self-harm, which is a mental health issue that we see sometimes in school. So when we talk about mental health, and often, lack of self-esteem, lack of self-worth can be underlying issues around sort of mental health. All those social, emotional issues that we see young people elicit. I don't know whether I'm answering this question correctly, Geraldine, so if not, please feel free to rephrase it, but those would be the sort of immediate mental health things that I can think of in a school situation. It's something we can come back to later via email if that would be more appropriate.
And I think, Karen, that obviously you mentioned this spotting the signs of students that are stressed, especially in the build-up to assessments and exams, and displaying maybe unordinary behaviour is something that would be important for staff to be able to be aware of. Yeah,
definitely. And whenever you're talking about children, it's when they're doing things that are not normal for them. So children that are becoming sort of very withdrawn, children that are becoming very extrovert, so things that become not normal for them are signs that there is something different happening with that young person. That could be a child protection issue, could be a safeguarding issue, but it's certainly always worth exploring when you've got a child doing something that's not normal for them.
Okay, and I've just got time for just one more question. It comes from Olivia Foskescu. I hope I pronounced that correctly. How can we organise a safe environment for teaching the kids about sexuality? Quite a big question.
Yes, it is, and I think that comes down to looking at the sources that you're going to use. And also thinking about the context within, different countries, that the views in different countries are very different around sexuality. But to think very carefully about what type of question you're going to use and the sources that you use, the different role models that you might use to explore what sexuality means, and think. So I would, if I was teaching sexuality in a classroom, I would be thinking carefully about the sources that are used, where they came from, how they express different viewpoints, and think about, what is one religious viewpoint, what is another, what are they why are they different, and also start to think about the links between that and certain literature, so there's huge opportunities to link for curriculum links there between curriculum opportunities between English, because of the exploration of that within a number of sort of literature items. But yeah, I think very carefully about the sources that are used to offer a rounded opinion.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. As I said, that was very informative. Lots to take away and think about, and maybe discuss tomorrow with colleagues within your schools. Just to remind you, our next webinar will be Voice Matters, building awareness of how voice can have an impact on your teaching, which will take place on the 23rd of November at 1:30 p.m. with our Associate Consultant, Miss Alexandra Haralambus. It's goodbye from us, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you.